In the concrete canyons of Chicago, where fortunes were forged in steel and data, one name echoed like a closing vault door: Arthur Sterling. His empire, Sterling Industries, was a titan of modern engineering and logistics, but its master was a man of old-world fury. His temper was not a sudden, hot explosion. It was a glacier, cold, immense, and capable of grinding careers into dust with terrifying precision. From grizzled union bosses on the factory floor to the sharp-suited MBAs in his boardroom, everyone understood the first rule of survival: do not disappoint Arthur Sterling. They tiptoed, they flattered, they acquiesced. No one ever pushed back. Until a Thursday evening at the Gilded Lyre, a restaurant so steeped in tradition, its velvet curtains seemed to hold the secrets of a century. There, a 22-year-old waitress named Clara May Thompson, whose quiet resilience was forged in the humidity of a small-town southern summer, decided that the immovable object had finally met a force with nothing left to lose. This is not a story about a princess meeting a prince. This is the story of the day a master watchmaker met a broken clock. The Gilded Lyre was less a restaurant and more a sanctuary for the city's old money. The lighting was low, the mahogany was dark, and the clinking of silverware on porcelain was the only acceptable percussion. The air smelled of beeswax, bourbon, and the kind of wealth that never needed to announce itself. For the staff, it was a nightly performance of invisible perfection. Water glasses refilled by unseen hands, needs met before they were fully formed. And tonight, the brooding king holding court in the most secluded booth was Arthur Sterling. His arrival sent a silent ripple of panic through the establishment. Antoine, the maitre d', whose composure was legendary, suddenly found his bow tie felt tight. Waitstaff checked their reflections in the polished silver, searching for non-existent flaws. Sterling did not command attention with volume. He commanded it with an unnerving stillness. He sat alone, a hawk in a bespoke charcoal suit, his presence sucking the warmth from his corner of the room. His eyes, a pale, piercing grey, seemed to catalogue the flaws in everything they touched. Clara May was 5 hours into a 12-hour double shift. A dull ache radiated from the arches of her feet, a familiar companion on the long journey from her tiny apartment in Pilsen. Her mind, however, was in a quiet, antiseptic room at Rush University Medical Center, where her grandmother, Eleanor, was waging a quiet war against the betrayal of her own lungs. The experimental treatment that offered a sliver of hope came with a price tag that looked like a telephone number. This job, with its coveted tips from the city's elite, was the only weapon she had. Every perfectly presented plate, every polite inquiry was another bullet in her arsenal. So, when Antoine approached her, his face a mask of strained calm, she felt the familiar drop in her stomach. "Clara May," he murmured, his French accent thick with anxiety. "Mr. Sterling's table. James has developed a sudden migraine. You're the most meticulous. You understand the protocol." The Sterling Protocol. It was a set of unwritten commandments passed down among the staff like folklore. Approach only from the left. Do not speak unless a direct question is asked. His preferred bourbon, a Pappy Van Winkle 23-year, should be poured to the exact height of the etching on his personal crystal glass. He would order the dry-aged porterhouse, seared to a precise temperature that the chef referred to as black and blue. Never, ever interrupt him if he was studying the antique timepiece he invariably placed on the table beside his plate. Clara took a slow, centering breath, the one Eleanor had taught her for moments when the world felt too heavy. Her professional grace settled over her like a cloak. Of course, Antoine. Her first approach was flawless. She poured the bourbon, the amber liquid catching the low light like a jewel. Sterling didn't look up, his attention fixed on the intricate face of the gold watch beside him. He nudged it with a forefinger, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. She placed the single, perfectly crusted roll on his bread plate. He ignored it. She retreated, her movements economical and silent, a ghost in a black apron. The grim ritual continued. The steak arrived, cooked to perfection, the scent of the char a testament to the kitchen's skill. Clara moved with the quiet efficiency that was her trademark, clearing plates from an adjacent table, always keeping Sterling in her periphery. It was then that she heard the sound, sharp and violent in the hushed room, the distinct, metallic thwack of a heavy gold object hitting the mahogany table. It was a summons. She turned, her heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat against her ribs. Arthur Sterling was glaring, not at his food, but at the watch. He had pushed his plate away, his meal untouched. He raised his cold grey eyes to meet hers, and the controlled stillness was gone. In its place was a gathering storm. "Is everything to your satisfaction, sir?" Clara asked, her voice a low, steady murmur. He didn't answer. Instead, he tapped a long, manicured finger on the face of the watch. "This is a 1953 Patek Philippe perpetual calendar. It is a masterpiece of engineering. It has kept perfect time for over 70 years. Tonight, in your establishment, it has stopped." The accusation hung in the air, thick and absurd. Clara glanced at the watch. It was indeed a thing of beauty, its face a constellation of tiny, perfect dials. "I'm very sorry to hear that, sir. Perhaps, he cut in, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl that was more frightening than any shout. "Perhaps your clumsy server jostled my arm when he seated me? Perhaps the ambient humidity in this room is not up to standard? Or perhaps your establishment is simply a vortex of incompetence that can stop time itself." The tables nearest them had fallen silent. The performance had a new, unscheduled act. Clara felt a flush of heat rise up her neck. It was the same helpless frustration she felt when listening to doctors explain complex procedures in condescendingly simple terms. But this was different. This wasn't a force of nature. It was a man choosing to be cruel. "Sir, I can assure you, we take the utmost care." "Do you?" He leaned forward, the full force of his personality, a physical pressure. "You serve food. You carry plates. What could you possibly understand about precision? About the delicate balance of a machine where 100 microscopic parts must work in perfect harmony? You are a cog in a machine you don't even comprehend." His words weren't just about the watch. They were about her simple uniform, her tired posture, her life, which he had dismissed as utterly without complexity or value. And in that moment, something inside Clara May Thompson, something forged in the quiet patience of watching her grandfather repair intricate clocks on his workbench, something that had been worn down by worry but never defeated, finally clicked into place. It wasn't a conscious act of rebellion. It was an instinct, a truth rising from the very core of her being. She thought of Eleanor, her body a failing machine, fighting with a grace this man could never imagine. She thought of her grandfather, his gnarled fingers able to coax life back into the most delicate of movements, teaching her to look, really look, for the tiny detail everyone else missed. She had endured so much casual disdain in this job, all to pay for a chance, just a chance, for the woman who had raised her. She had had enough. She took a step closer to the table, her fear replaced by a strange, crystalline calm. Her eyes didn't meet his. They focused on the watch. "What do you think you're doing?" Sterling demanded. "Looking," she said softly. She leaned in, her gaze sharp and focused. The diners watched, breathless. Antoine stood frozen near the kitchen door, his face ashen. "The crown," Clara said, her voice still quiet, but carrying in the sudden silence. "It's extended. By less than a millimeter. It's a pull-out crown. You must have snagged it on your cufflink when you sat down. It's in the time-setting position. That's why it stopped." She looked up from the watch and met his gaze directly. The storm in his eyes faltered, replaced by a flicker of utter disbelief. "A machine is only as good as its operator, sir," she continued, her voice gaining a strength she didn't know she possessed. "You can own a masterpiece, but it doesn't mean you understand how it works. My grandfather used to say that a person who blames their tools has already admitted their own failings." A collective, silent gasp seemed to be sucked from the air. Mr. Sterling, the Titan, the Hawk, was being lectured by a waitress. He stared at her, speechless. He slowly looked down at his cuff, then at the watch. With a movement so subtle it was almost invisible, he used his thumbnail to press the crown. There was a faint click. On the face of the watch, the tiny second hand gave a slight shudder, and then began to sweep, smooth and sure, around its dial. Time had restarted. He raised his eyes back to hers. The anger was gone, replaced by something far more unsettling, a cold, analytical curiosity. He looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time, not as a piece of the restaurant's scenery, but as an anomaly, a variable he hadn't accounted for. Clara straightened up, smoothing her apron. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving a tremor in her hands, but her resolve was a steel rod down her spine. "My apologies for your inconvenience," she said, the formal words a stark contrast to the scene that had just unfolded. She looked Arthur Sterling, a man whose net worth could fund a small country, directly in the eye, and I quit. She turned and walked, not ran, towards the kitchen. She left behind a perfectly cooked, forgotten steak, a ticking gold watch, a billionaire rendered silent, and the wreckage of a performance that had been utterly and magnificently upended. As she pushed through the swinging doors into the clamor of the kitchen, she didn't feel triumph or fear. For the first time in months, the crushing weight on her shoulders felt a little bit lighter. She had no way of knowing that her small act of truth hadn't ended her encounter with Arthur Sterling. It had merely wound the mainspring of a much more complicated machine. The sense of lightness Clara felt lasted for the duration of her train ride home. It was the heady, defiant euphoria of a prisoner who had finally spoken truth to the warden. It carried her through the stunned silence of her co-workers, past Antoine's whispered, "Ma chérie, what have you done?" and out into the crisp Chicago autumn. But euphoria, as she was grimly reminded the next morning, doesn't pay for oxygen tanks or negotiate with hospital billing departments. The notice for the next payment on Eleanor's treatment was tucked under a magnet on her refrigerator, a stark white reminder of her new, terrifying reality. She was unemployed, and in the insular world of Chicago's fine dining, the story of the waitress who had dressed down Arthur Sterling would spread like wildfire. She was not just unemployed, she was likely unemployable. The day bled into a grey, anxious afternoon. She sat at her small kitchen table, updating a resume that suddenly felt thin and useless. She scrolled through job listings for diners and chain restaurants, each one representing a step down in pay, a step further away from her goal. A knot of despair was tightening in her chest. Just as she was about to surrender to a wave of hopelessness, the intercom in her apartment buzzed, a harsh, grating sound that made her jump. She wasn't expecting anyone. Figuring it was a mistaken delivery, she pressed the talk button. "Yes." A calm, cultured voice, smooth as worn leather, came through the speaker. "Miss Clara May Thompson, My name is Elias Vance. I represent Mr. Arthur Sterling." Clara's blood went cold. This was it. A lawsuit. A cease and desist. A formal complaint delivered by a man with a name like a law firm. The defiance of the previous night evaporated, leaving behind a residue of pure dread. I have nothing to say to Mr. Sterling," she managed to stammer. "He is not asking you to speak, Miss Thompson. He is requesting a moment of your time. I can assure you it is not for the reason you might fear. May I come up?" A sliver of morbid curiosity, warring with every self-preservation instinct she possessed, won out. What could he possibly want? To fire her again, but more officially this time? She buzzed him in. The man who stood at her door a few moments later was the antithesis of Arthur Sterling. Where Sterling was a creature of sharp angles and cold intensity, Elias Vance was composed of softer lines and a quiet, observant warmth. He was likely in his late 60s, with a neatly trimmed grey beard, kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, and a tweed jacket that spoke of academia rather than corporate warfare. He carried an old, scuffed leather briefcase. "Miss Thompson," he said, with a gentle, disarming smile. "Thank you for seeing me." "I'm not sure I had much of a choice," she said, hugging her arms to her chest. Her apartment, her haven, suddenly felt small and shabby under his polite gaze. "Oh, one always has a choice," Elias said, his eyes taking in the room, not with judgment, but with a surprising empathy, lingering for a moment on a framed photo of a smiling, healthier Eleanor on the wall. "That is precisely why I am here." Mr. Sterling was impressed. Clara stared at him. "Impressed? I corrected him in front of a room full of his peers and then quit. What part of that was impressive?" "The part where you were right," Elias stated simply, "and the part where you were not afraid to be." Mr. Sterling is surrounded by an echo chamber. He is insulated by men and women who are paid handsomely to agree with him, to anticipate his moods, to tell him his watch has stopped because the earth has tilted on its axis. Last night, you told him he snagged the crown on his cufflink. For free. He finds that novel. He placed his briefcase on her coffee table and opened it, the clasps clicking softly. "He would like to offer you a position." Clara felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. This had to be a joke, a bizarre, cruel prank. A position? Doing what? Winding his watch collection. A genuine smile touched Elias's lips. "Something like that. He is creating a new role. In-house consultant, office of the CEO. Your sole responsibility would be to find the flaw in the machine." The words hung in the air, so specific, so strange, that she could only stare. "I don't understand. I'm a waitress. I have a 2-year degree from a community college." "Your grandfather was a horologist, was he not?" Elias asked gently. "A watch and clockmaker in Savannah, Georgia." Clara was stunned. "How did you—" "Mr. Sterling is a thorough man. He values precision. You did not just have a lucky guess, Miss Thompson. You had a lifetime of observation. You saw not just a watch, but a system. You identified a single, minute point of failure that caused the entire mechanism to seize. Mr. Sterling believes that skill, the ability to look at a complex system and find the single loose screw, the one misaligned gear, is transferable. He wishes to aim it at his business interests." Elias slid a single, thick sheet of cream-colored paper from his briefcase and placed it on the table. It was a formal letter of offer. Clara's eyes scanned the text and landed on the salary figure. She stopped breathing. It wasn't just a lifeline. It was a winning lottery ticket. It was enough to cover all of Eleanor's treatments, to hire a private nurse, to give her the one thing money was supposed to buy, peace of mind. This was a trap. It had to be. A beautiful, gilded trap. Why? She asked, her voice a whisper. Why would he do this? Is this some kind of revenge? To own the person who embarrassed him? Elias's kind expression grew serious. I have worked for Arthur Sterling for 40 years. I knew his father. He is a difficult, demanding, and profoundly wounded man. He worships at the altar of perfection because he has experienced a catastrophic failure he can never forgive himself for. But he is not petty. Revenge is an inefficient allocation of resources. This is not about pride, Miss Thompson. It is about value. He believes you possess a unique and valuable perspective. He wants to know if he is right. He gestured to the letter. The offer is genuine. It includes a comprehensive private health insurance plan for you and your designated dependent, effective immediately. I am aware of your grandmother's situation. The mention of Eleanor, the quiet confirmation that they knew everything, was like a key turning in a lock. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a custom-made solution to her life's most painful problem. It felt less like an opportunity and more like a surrender. She sank onto her couch, her mind a whirlwind. To work for that man, the embodiment of the casual arrogance she despised. It was a deal with the devil. But the devil was offering to save an angel. What would I have to do? She asked, her voice hollow. You would report directly to him, Elias said. He would present you with a problem, a potential acquisition, an underperforming division, a contract negotiation. You would be given all the data. But he will not want a financial analysis. He has 100 people for that. He will want your analysis. You will look at the organization as a machine. You will find the weakness, the friction, the part that is about to break. You will be expected to be honest, direct, and immune to his temper. Your only loyalty will be to the truth of the system as you see it. And if I say no? If you say no, Elias said, his voice softening, then I will thank you for your time, and Mr. Sterling will wire a sum to a private account to cover your grandmother's medical expenses for the next year, anonymously. He will consider it a finder's fee for identifying a flaw in his personal conduct, and you will never hear from us again. As I said, you have a choice. Clara stared at the letter. An anonymous donation, a clean break. It was the safe path, the one that preserved her pride. But the other path, it was terrifying. It was a compromise, but it offered something more. A sustainable future. A chance to use a part of herself she'd thought was just a quirky hobby. Her grandfather's legacy. Could she walk into the lion's den every single day? Could she face that cold, glacial anger? Her pride was a luxury. Eleanor's next breath was not. She reached for a pen on the coffee table. Her hand was rock steady. Where do I sign? Elias Vance gave her that same gentle, knowing smile. Welcome to Sterling Industries, Miss Thompson. Your office will be ready on Monday morning. As he left, Clara was alone with the contract and the dizzying, terrifying certainty that she hadn't just taken a job. She had agreed to fix the most complicated, broken machine she had ever seen. Sterling Tower was a monument to brutalist ambition, a spear of dark glass and steel that stabbed at the Chicago sky. The lobby was an Arctic expanse of black granite and chrome, so silent that the click of Clara's sensible heels sounded like a judgment. It was a place engineered to make a person feel small, a single cog in an impossibly vast machine. Dressed in a simple navy blue dress she'd spent a third of her final paycheck on, Clara felt like a sparrow that had wandered into a falcon's eyrie. Elias Vance met her in the lobby, his warm presence a small pocket of humanity in the sterile cavern. He led her to a private elevator that ascended the 90 floors with a silent, stomach-dropping velocity. "The top floor is Mr. Sterling's domain," Elias explained as the city shrank below them. "His office, my office, the boardroom, and now yours. You are being placed at the very center of the mechanism." The elevator doors opened into a space of breathtaking minimalism. The floors were polished concrete, the walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a god's-eye view of the sprawling city and the vast, indifferent blue of Lake Michigan. It felt less like an office and more like a command center at the end of the world. Her office was a glass-walled cube, situated between Elias's and the imposing double doors of solid oak that led to Arthur Sterling's sanctuary. "He's on a conference call with our German division," Elias said, gesturing toward the closed doors. "Your first project is on your desk. He wants your assessment by end of day." On the sleek, empty surface of her new desk sat a single, thick binder. The cover read, "Project Nightingale, Acquisition Analysis." Inside were hundreds of pages of market data, financial projections, and corporate structure charts for a mid-sized robotics and automation firm. For hours, Clara sat in a state of quiet terror. She read through the documents, the jargon and numbers blurring into an incomprehensible wall of data. This was a world she didn't understand. She felt like a fraud, a waitress playing dress-up in a glass cage. What could she possibly see that a team of Harvard-educated analysts had missed? She closed the binder, the feeling of failure a cold weight in her stomach. She thought of her grandfather's workshop, the comforting smell of oil and old wood. He never started with the whole clock. He'd always listen to it first, watch it, look for the tiny hesitation in the second hand, the slight change in the pitch of the tick-tock. He looked for the rhythm and the break in it. She pushed the financial data aside and found the personnel files buried in the back. She read about the executives. The COO, a charismatic salesman. The COO, a logistics genius. And the head of R&D, a man named Dr. Alistair Finch, a brilliant but notoriously prickly engineer who had founded the company but had been pushed out of the CEO role by investors years ago. She found transcripts of interviews, articles from trade magazines, even the company's internal newsletters. She began to map it out on a blank sheet of paper, not like a corporate flowchart, but like the gear train of a watch. The CEO was the face. The COO was the winding barrel, providing the power. But Dr. Finch, he was the escapement, the very heart of the mechanism that gave it its unique, innovative pulse. And according to the reports, he was unhappy. He felt his art was being commercialized, his creations cheapened for mass production. He was the source of all the company's value, but he was also the source of its internal friction. He was the gear that was grinding. At precisely 3 p.m., the oak doors to Sterling's office opened. Arthur Sterling emerged, looking not at her, but past her, his focus already on his next objective. He was speaking to Elias, who had fallen into step beside him. "The Germans are dragging their feet. They lack vision. Send them the revised terms and give them 24 hours to accept, or we walk." His voice was the same cold, precise instrument she remembered. He stopped by the great window, looking down at the city. Finally, his pale grey eyes swiveled and landed on her. There was no warmth, no flicker of recognition from the restaurant. He was looking at a component, a tool. "You," he said, the single word a command. "Report." He didn't move from the window, his back half turned to her. Clara took a breath. This was the moment. She could regurgitate the financial data and prove she was out of her depth, or she could trust the lesson of the watch. She stood and walked not towards him, but to the large whiteboard on her office wall. She picked up a marker. "Sterling Industries shouldn't buy Nightingale Robotics," she said, her voice clear and steady in the quiet office. Sterling turned slowly from the window, one eyebrow raised in a silent, dangerous question. Elias watched her, his expression unreadable. "You're proposing to buy a company for its innovation," Clara continued, sketching out a series of interconnected circles on the board. "But the innovation isn't the patents or the products. It's a man, Dr. Alistair Finch, and he is the company's critical point of failure." She began to lay it out. "You acquire the company. You absorb it into the Sterling machine. You demand efficiency. You streamline production. Within 6 months, Dr. Finch, who already resents the commercial direction of his current board, will feel like he's working in a cage. He will grow resentful. His work will suffer. Or more likely, he will quit. And the moment he walks out the door, the company you just paid $500 million for becomes an empty shell. You'll have bought the clock, but you'll have let the watchmaker walk away." Silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the building's ventilation. Sterling walked slowly towards her office, his eyes fixed on her diagram. He stopped at the glass wall, studying her, then the board. He wasn't angry. He was calculating. "Every analyst, from our team to Wall Street, says this is a sound acquisition," he stated, his voice flat. "They see a company with a 20% year-over-year growth in a key sector." "They see the numbers," Clara countered, her confidence growing. "They don't see the gears. You're not buying a company. You're buying a man's soul, and you're planning to stick it on an assembly line. It will break." He stared at the board for a long, heavy minute. He looked at the circle she had labeled Finch, which she had drawn with a small, jagged crack through it. "And your recommendation?" he asked, the question a sharp probe. "Don't buy the company," she said. "Poach the man. Forget the acquisition. Start a new, bespoke R&D division here, the Sterling Innovation Lab. Give Dr. Finch a blank check, a small, dedicated team, and zero corporate oversight. Let him build. You'll get all the innovation for a fraction of the cost, and you'll have his loyalty instead of his resentment." Sterling looked from the board to her, and for the first time, she saw the same cold, analytical curiosity from the restaurant. The look of a man who has just discovered a new, strange, and potentially powerful tool. He turned to Elias. "Cancel the Nightingale offer. Draft a proposal for a Dr. Alistair Finch. Use the terms she just outlined." He fixed his gaze back on Clara. "My father was an engineer. He always said that any idiot can see a broken machine. It takes a genius to see the crack that's about to form." He turned and walked back into his office, the oak doors closing with a soft, final click. Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, her knees suddenly weak. Elias stood in the doorway of her office, a small, proud smile on his face. "The first test," he said quietly, "is always the most difficult. Well done, Miss Thompson." As she sat back down at her desk, the city lights beginning to glitter in the twilight, Clara realized the truth of her new position. She wasn't an assistant or a consultant. She was a lens, a new way for Arthur Sterling to see the world, and she had just shown him something he had never seen before, the wisdom in not buying something, but in setting it free. She had survived the first day, but she knew, with a chilling certainty, that the machines she would be asked to analyze would only get more complex and more broken. The following months were an education in the ruthless mechanics of power. Clara learned the internal rhythms of Sterling Industries, a vast and complex machine of commerce and ambition. She discovered that Arthur Sterling's obsession with perfection was not a simple character flaw. It was the company's driving principle and its most profound weakness. He ran it with such tight control that he often choked the very innovation he sought. Her role evolved. She became his shadow analyst. Before any major decision, a binder would appear on her desk. She would dissect the human systems at play, looking for the disgruntled executive, the flawed company culture, the vanity of a rival CEO. She was right more often than she was wrong. Her memos, written in plain, direct language, became required reading for Sterling before he entered any negotiation. A strange, unspoken rapport grew between them. It was not friendship. It was the professional intimacy of a surgeon and his most trusted, specialized instrument. He would leave complex mechanical puzzles on her desk, a ship's chronometer, a Fabergé egg, with a simple note: "Find the flaw." It was his way of testing her, of keeping her mind sharp. She would leave the solution on his desk, often with a note of her own, explaining the elegant simplicity of the design he'd missed. Her real work, the work that burrowed into her mind, was done late at night, long after the offices had emptied. Driven by a need to understand the man himself, she began to explore the company's digital archives. She wanted to find the source of his malfunction, the original crack that had defined him. That was when she found it, buried deep in a decommissioned server, mislabeled as legacy tax filings, was a project folder named Prometheus. It was dated 25 years prior. Curiosity overriding her caution, she opened it. It wasn't a corporate file. It was a passion project. The documents outlined a revolutionary design for a helical turbine engine, a technology that promised clean, hyper-efficient energy. The language in the proposals wasn't the dry corporate speak she was used to. It was filled with a fiery, youthful optimism, a desire to change the world. Then she saw the names on the original charter: Arthur Sterling, project lead, and Marcus Thorne, senior partner and mentor. The name Thorne hit her like a physical blow. Marcus Thorne was now the CEO of Helios Consolidated, Sterling's most hated and formidable rival. The public story was that they were business competitors, but the files told a deeper, more tragic tale. As she pieced together the fragmented emails, the old schematics, and the frantic legal notices, a story of profound betrayal emerged. Project Prometheus wasn't just Arthur's project. It was his father's dream. Arthur Sterling Sr. had been a brilliant but unheralded engineer who had sketched the initial designs on his deathbed. Arthur, then a young, idealistic man, had made it his life's mission to bring it to fruition. Marcus Thorne, his father's best friend and his own mentor, was the man he trusted to help him. But Thorne had played a long game. He had let Arthur do the work, solve the complex engineering problems, and secure the funding. Then, on the eve of their public unveiling, Thorne had vanished. He had stolen the patents, subtly altered the designs to make them proprietary to himself, and used the technology to found Helios. He hadn't just stolen a project. He had stolen Arthur's father's legacy, bankrupted the fledgling Sterling Industries, and shattered the young man's faith in humanity. The Arthur Sterling she knew had been forged in the crucible of that betrayal. His coldness, his mistrust, his obsession with control. It was all a defense mechanism, an armored shell built around the wreckage of his former self. But that wasn't the ghost. The ghost was in the final document in the folder. It was a scanned, handwritten letter. The paper was faded, the handwriting elegant. It was from Arthur's father. It spoke of his pride in his son, of his belief that Arthur had the heart of a builder, not a businessman. It ended with a single, haunting sentence. "Remember, son, the point of a great machine is not just that it works, but what it works for. Make sure it works for good." Clara felt the air leave her lungs, The cold, ruthless titan of industry was a ghost, haunted by the man he was supposed to be, the promise he had failed to keep. His entire empire, his relentless drive for profit and power, was a monument to his failure, a frantic attempt to prove the man who betrayed him wrong. He had built a flawless machine, but he had forgotten what it was for. She shut down her computer, the silence of the 90th floor pressing in on her. She finally understood the mechanism. She had found the flaw. It wasn't in a gear or a circuit board, it was in his heart. The question was, could a machine like Arthur Sterling ever be repaired? The next morning, the air in the office felt different to Clara. The hum of commerce, the quiet intensity. It all seemed like a distraction from the fundamental truth she had uncovered. She saw Sterling not as a fearsome employer, but as a man trapped in a prison of his own making. She waited until midday, when she knew he was between meetings. She took the faded, printed copy of his father's letter, her hands surprisingly steady, and walked to the oak doors. She knocked once. "Enter." The clipped command came. He was standing by the window, staring down at the city, a silhouette against the pale winter sky. "What is it, Miss Thompson?" "I'm expecting a call from the board." She didn't speak. She walked to his massive, uncluttered desk and placed the single sheet of paper in the center of the polished wood. He turned, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes, which then changed to confusion as he saw the letter. He walked over, picked it up, and his entire body went rigid. The color drained from his face. The carefully constructed armor of Arthur Sterling, CEO, disintegrated in an instant, leaving behind a man who looked vulnerable and utterly exposed. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice a raw, strangled whisper. "From the Prometheus file," she said softly. "I know about Marcus Thorne. I know what he took from you." A tempest of fury erupted in his eyes, a rage more profound and personal than anything she had witnessed before. "You went into my private archives. You had no right." "You tasked me with finding the flaw in the machine," Clara said, her voice even, refusing to break under his glare. "I believe I've found the primary one. It's you. This entire company. It's a machine built for revenge. It's not building anything. It's just fighting a ghost. And Thorne is counting on that." He stared at her, his jaw clenched, his knuckles white where he gripped the letter. For a moment, she thought he would fire her, would have security escort her from the building. But then, something inside him seemed to collapse. The rage receded, leaving behind a vast, empty landscape of grief. He sank into his leather chair, the letter still clutched in his hand. "He's not a ghost," Arthur said, his voice hollow. "He's trying to acquire a controlling interest in our logistics division, using a series of shell corporations. Elias uncovered it last week. It's not about the division. It's not about profit. He wants to get inside my company. He wants to finish the job." The final piece clicked into place. This wasn't just business. It was the final act of a decades-long war. "So what's the plan?" Clara asked, her tone shifting from diagnosis to strategy. "How do you fight him?" Arthur let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "The same way I always fight. I will crush him. I will leverage our capital, initiate a hostile takeover of one of his key suppliers, and bleed him dry. I will destroy him in the market." "You'll fight him with anger and money," Clara challenged. "And he's expecting that. He's counting on it. He knows your playbook because he's the reason you wrote it. He will anticipate every move. He has built a trap for the man you are now, not for the man you were supposed to be." "And what would you have me do?" he scoffed. "Send him a strongly worded letter?" "You'll do what your father asked you to do," Clara said, her voice ringing with a sudden, fierce conviction. You'll make a machine that works for good. An idea, audacious and terrifying, was taking shape in her mind. Thorne built his empire on a stolen, commercialized version of Prometheus, but you still have the original plans, the purer, more elegant design your father envisioned. They're useless, Arthur said. They can't compete with Helios's mass-market version. They don't have to, Clara insisted, leaning forward, her eyes bright with the thrill of the idea. You don't fight him in the market. You make the market irrelevant. You create a new, non-profit foundation, the Sterling Legacy Foundation, and you give the technology away. You open source the original Prometheus plans. You release your father's designs to the world for free. The sheer radical insanity of it left him speechless. It was a move so contrary to every principle of capitalism and corporate warfare that it was almost beautiful. Think of it, Clara pressed on. Thorne's entire empire is built on a proprietary technology he sells for a fortune. You make a better, cleaner version of that technology, free to any engineer, any university, any developing nation that wants to use it. You don't just hurt his bottom line. You render his entire life's work obsolete and immoral. You stop being the corporate raider he created, and you become the visionary your father always knew you were. A new light was dawning in Arthur's pale eyes. Not the cold fire of rage, but the white-hot spark of a brilliant, unexpected strategy. For the first time, he was looking at her not as an employee, but as an equal, an ally. He would call it a stunt, Arthur mused, testing the shape of the idea. A desperate act of corporate sabotage. And you will show them your father's letter, Clara countered. You'll show them the original schematics. You will tell the world the real story. You won't be fighting for Sterling Industries' stock price. You'll be fighting for your father's soul. The silence in the room was thick with possibility. Arthur walked back to the great glass window. He looked down at the city, but his expression was different. He didn't look like a king surveying his domain. He looked like an architect seeing an empty plot of land, imagining what he could build. "Get Elias in here," Arthur said, his voice low but firm, a new and unfamiliar resolve hardening his tone. "And get our patent attorneys. I want them to find a way to create an unbreakable open-source license." He turned to face her, and the ghost that had haunted his eyes for 25 years was, for the first time, gone. In its place was a clear, brilliant light. Let's give him a war he doesn't know how to fight. Clara felt a surge of pure, unadulterated purpose. This was it. The ultimate repair. They weren't just going to fix a company. They were going to fix a life. The broken billionaire and the waitress who saw the cracked gear. Together, they were going to build something that worked for good. The weeks leading up to the annual Sterling Industries shareholder meeting became a blur of controlled, purposeful action. The atmosphere on the 90th floor transformed. The cold, tense efficiency was replaced by the electric hum of a team with a shared, audacious mission. Clara, Arthur, and Elias formed a tight-knit triumvirate, working late into the nights, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of righteous conviction. Clara was no longer just an analyst. She was a core strategist. She worked with the legal team to structure the foundation, with engineers to digitize and annotate Arthur Sr.'s original plans, and with a small, trusted PR firm to craft a narrative that was simple, powerful, and true. She saw a side of Arthur she would never have thought possible. The glacial fury was gone, replaced by a focused passion. When he spoke of his father's designs, his voice held a reverence and excitement that was infectious. He, in turn, began to treat her not as an instrument, but as a partner. He asked about Eleanor. listening with genuine concern as Clara gave him updates on her grandmother's slow but steady progress. One afternoon, Elias quietly informed her that the board of the new Sterling Legacy Foundation had passed its first resolution to fully fund a new pulmonary research wing at Rush University Medical Center, with Eleanor Thompson as its first honorary patient, guaranteeing her the best possible care for the rest of her life. It was a gesture of such profound, quiet gratitude that it left Clara speechless. The day of the meeting dawned cold and clear. The boardroom was a theater of war, filled with the quiet rustle of expensive suits and the low murmur of anticipation. Marcus Thorne was there, not in person, but his presence was felt through his lieutenants, a team of aggressive corporate attorneys who sat on one side of the table, their faces radiating smug confidence. They had acquired enough stock through their shell companies to force a vote on a new board seat, their first move in a long campaign to dismantle the company from within. They believed they had Arthur Sterling trapped. The meeting began predictably. Thorne's lawyers made their case, speaking of synergy, shareholder value, and the need for new vision. They painted Arthur as a brilliant but volatile leader whose time had passed. Then, it was Arthur's turn. He walked to the head of the table, not with a stack of financial reports, but with a single, old, leather-bound journal in his hand. His father's journal. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm, resonant, and devoid of its usual icy edge. "For the past 25 years, I have run this company with a single-minded focus on profit and expansion. I have built it into a fortress. Today, I am here to tell you that I was wrong. A fortress is a defensive structure. It's time we started building a lighthouse." He opened the journal. On the massive screen behind him, instead of market projections, a scanned page of elegant, handwritten notes and a complex schematic appeared. "This is the work of my father, Arthur Sterling Sr. This is Project Prometheus." A confused ripple went through the room. Thorne's lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. This was not on their script. For 20 minutes, Arthur told them the whole story. He told them of his father's dream, of his own youthful idealism, of Marcus Thorne's mentorship and ultimate betrayal. He spoke not with rage, but with a profound and quiet sadness, the tone of a man who had finally made peace with his own scars. He laid the entire, broken history of his life and his company bare for them all to see. Then he closed the journal. The screen behind him changed to a clean, hopeful logo, the Sterling Legacy Foundation. Mr. Thorne's attempt to infiltrate this company is not a business move. It is an attempt to silence this story, to bury this legacy for good, Arthur declared, his voice rising with a controlled power. He built his fortune on a version of this technology that he stole and corrupted. He believes the only value is that which can be owned and sold. Today, we will show him a different kind of value. He announced the immediate launch of the foundation, seeded with a personal trust valued at $2 billion. He outlined its mission, to make the original, superior Prometheus designs available for free to the entire world. It was a strategic masterstroke. The narrative wasn't just changed, it was detonated. This was no longer about a boardroom vote. It was a moral referendum. The shareholders who had been calculating risk and reward were now faced with a choice between a man trying to honor his father by giving a gift to the world and the man who wanted to stop him. Thorne's lead attorney, a man named Peterson, was pale. He saw his carefully planned strategy crumbling. "This is an absurd theatrical gesture," he sputtered. "It's a flagrant misuse of corporate assets to settle a personal vendetta." "On the contrary," a calm voice said. Clara May Thompson stood up from her seat against the wall. All eyes turned to her. "The foundation is a separate entity, funded personally by Mr. Sterling. But the question of Mr. Thorne's technology is a matter of direct concern to this board. She placed a new file folder on the table. For the past month, I have been analyzing the Helios engine, using Mr. Sterling Sr.'s original designs as a baseline. Mr. Thorne didn't just steal the technology, he took a shortcut. She clicked a remote. The screen showed a complex 3D rendering of two engines, side by side. One was the elegant Sterling design. The other was the bulkier Helios version. To make the engine cheaper to mass produce, Clara explained, her voice steady and clear, Mr. Thorne removed a key component, a harmonic dampener he deemed redundant. My analysis, confirmed by a team from MIT, shows that without that dampener, the Helios engine develops a microfracture in its primary turbine shaft after approximately 5,000 hours of operation. It's a catastrophic design flaw, a ticking time bomb. She looked directly at Thorne's lawyers. There are currently over 10,000 Helios engines in operation worldwide. The Foundation isn't just a legacy project, it is a public service announcement. It's an attempt to prevent a disaster that your client created. Checkmate. It was no longer about corporate maneuvering. She had exposed Thorne not just as a thief, but as a reckless fraud whose greed had endangered thousands. The vote was a mere formality. The motion for Thorne's board seat was unanimously rejected. The board then voted to launch a full, independent investigation into Helios Consolidated and to issue a global safety warning. Marcus Thorne's empire, built on a lie, had begun to crumble. When the boardroom finally emptied, only 3 people remained: Arthur, Elias, and Clara. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, bathing the room in a warm, golden light. Arthur walked over to where Clara stood by the window. For a long moment, he was silent, simply looking out at the city. "You said a machine is only as good as its operator," he said quietly, not looking at her. "You were right. I was a terrible operator." He finally turned to her. "You didn't just fix my company, Clara May. I think you might have fixed me." "I just showed you the original schematic," she replied with a small smile. "You were the one who had the courage to build it." He held out his hand. "Thank you." She took it, her grip firm. "You're welcome, Arthur." There were no grand declarations, no dramatic confessions. There was only a shared victory and a quiet, profound sense of a new beginning. The process of dismantling Thorne's influence and building the foundation would take years. Eleanor's recovery would be a long, slow journey. Nothing was solved overnight. But standing there, high above the city, they were no longer a billionaire and a waitress. They were a builder and an engineer, partners looking at a set of blueprints for a better machine, ready to start the long, patient work of putting it together.